does economics matter in business?
Yeah, and lots of businesses succeed during a recession, don't they?
That leads into a sort of a Keynesian economic theory that when the economies slow down, you invest.
Engagement and productivity as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're very closely aligned.
So yeah, price elasticity. Don't just assume it's an economic word. It really does apply, and it's really, really important as part of your pricing strategy. So I went to a talk last night in Birmingham.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite sure whether it would be for me or not. It was about AI,
Yeah.
and I think listeners will know that we're pretty early adopters on that. Not quite at the bleeding edge of it, but certainly early adopters. So I think most of what they were talking about I knew, but there were a couple of things in there that I thought was quite interesting. One of them was a guy who does lots of interviews, says always assume now that if you're doing an online interview, Zoom, Teams thing, assume that the interviewee has got an AI bot giving them prompts for how to answer your questions.
Pretty clever.
Yeah, I've never come across it before. Have you? I don't know what it's called.
Same applies to the podcast, doesn't it?
Yes, Richard, it does.
You are the best.
Thanks. That was really heartfelt.
So, okay.
So that's interesting. So if that's the case, how many other occasions might there be? You know, maybe there's good uses for that. Well, certainly from the interviewee's point of view, they probably think that's already a good use, right? But salespeople, sales agents, maybe that sort of thing. Why aren't we already harnessing that as widely as we could, where you're on a cold call with someone and it tells you how to respond to whatever objection they've just come up with? We should think about that. I was doing something the other day on that. I was using ChatGPT to do some cold call training. I just got it to adopt the persona of the person on the other end of the phone and then give me some tips. Brilliant. What was the other thing I came up with on there, though? What was it that I told you about earlier that I'd heard of this AI thing? It was
there was that one.
Useful, surprising. There was a general thought about where we're going with cybersecurity and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, I tell you what, it was CV.
That was it.
You give it your CV, and it creates a podcast, a video podcast with two people split screen talking about you in a promotional way.
Yeah. That's quite interesting.
Pretty cool, isn't it? So that's your CV. But what about if you did it for your products?
Yeah.
Why don't you create a podcast, completely AI generated? These people aren't real. Script is all AI generated. Just give it your website, maybe your product brochures. And so there you go. Create me a 15-minute podcast discussing what we do.
Interesting.
And it's got this air of authenticity and neutrality in it. It's an incredible...
Well, you might get some insights, isn't it?
Well, that's true. It might say something you
might say,
oh, you picked that up, or you missed that.
Well, that familiarity, isn't it? I guess we were talking about that the other day on the whole COVID thing, isn't it? Post-COVID, and we all get a bit familiar with now where things are and everything. And I was chatting to someone this week about just their whole kind of buyer journey, just going onto their site. And I said, I bet if you put a GoPro on and you walk through the entrance into your facility and walked around, then you watch that footage back, you'd see all sorts of things that you don't see
when you're actually
doing it. And how then you do that as a kind of buyer journey touch point.
So you should do the same with your website, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Or just Google your company's name and see what other stuff comes up, or ChatGPT it. So I just thought that's quite interesting. If, maybe there's something psychologically weird about the way we trust podcasters like us. We would say good, trustworthy stuff.
Very dangerous.
Don't go down that road. But if it worked, then making AI-generated versions of your CV or your products or your company.
Any good vol au vents at this event you're at?
Crisps.
Just crisps.
Yeah. Plenty of beer. They did do alcohol-free though, so I had a Beck's Blue. I'm not really a big fan of Beck's Blue.
Guinness Zero now.
Yeah, I didn't have any of that. It was in the BGF buildings, Business Growth Fund buildings in Birmingham. Very swanky. 7th floor, big views of the city. Pool table in the corner.
No vol au vents.
Lovely bar. But clearly, they've missed out on the vol au vents. But they leave crumbs all over the floor, don't they, vol au vents? It's that flaky pastry stuff.
Yeah, flaky. Sometimes you get the mushroom one, don't you? Like, no, I've got the mushroom one.
I quite like the mushroom one. It's the flaky pastry.
Flaky pastry.
But they had crisps, they had some beer.
That's all you need.
That's all you need. It was good. Right, should we do a podcast?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Every week we try and come up with something interesting, useful, funny, or just downright a bit wacky, but always intended for the owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises. And it's Rich back in the studio. Rich, I've missed you.
Back from...
It's been, I think we've had 2 or 3 now where we've had guests coming in and all sorts of stuff.
The letters have been piling up.
They have the complaints. We miss you.
Oh no, it's got way better.
Well, there was a couple of those as well.
Some of the best episodes I've had in the last couple of weeks.
Let's have an insight. So yeah, it's back. The Terrible Two are back. The Dreadful Duo. We got another episode for you this week. Now, are we on episode 115?
I think we are.
Now, I'm going to tell you now, no interesting stories about 115. No, Googled it, ChatGPT'd it. It's the most boring number ever. There's not even a couple of nice sort of mathematical twists on it or an interesting element. Moscovium. Apparently it's half-life of a fraction of a second.
Yeah, right.
Boring. No popular culture references to 115. And I looked ahead, and you're going to be free for the next few. They're all boring.
I was going to say, have we got a corker for 116?
No, that's rubbish. 117 is pretty rubbish. I don't know. I didn't look too far ahead.
It's going to be a prime number, isn't it? 117? It's got to be, isn't it?
Probably.
It's got to be.
So, so you let off hook on that one. So, previous episodes, 114 was Tracy.
Tracy, yeah.
Travelled all the way here to Shrewsbury, millions of miles away. And she talked about imposter syndrome for salespeople. It's going good.
Yeah, it's good.
So we did that. And there's another one of Tracy's episodes coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah, I did one with her around building communities.
A little trailer for you there then, building communities.
Little teaser.
That would be in a few weeks' time.
That was a great chat, yeah.
So that was 114. 113 was Steve. Now, you were away for that one. I did that.
Yeah.
Guest for Steve. What did you think of that?
Quite enjoyed that one, actually.
Did you watch it?
I listened to it. On YouTube whilst I was doing some other things. But no, it's good. I have good practical advice on just roll your sleeves up and some kind of just real insight from someone who's been there and done it to have a bit of gumption and don't just sit behind your desk.
Pretty driven, wasn't he? I thought good perspective because he'd retired. That's quite good. But his general message about there's no shortcuts. You just got to work hard. I think some people go into sales with the wrong attitude, and he certainly had the right attitude.
There's quite a lot of what they call pilot-light salespeople. Because
they never go out.
They never go out.
We got one of those on their sales thing.
That's your dad joke for
that's the dad joke for the week.
I had requests for dad jokes actually this week.
Did you?
Somebody emailed me and said,
Have you got one handy then?
That was it.
That was it? Oh, come on.
No, I haven't got one this week.
Pilot light joke.
But yeah.
Well, I was talking to someone who came in the office this morning and they listened to that episode and they've shared it with their sales team. There you go.
There we go.
A lot of that.
Yeah.
See what that makes you think. So that was 113. 112. What was 112?
Oh.
Again, a couple of weeks ago.
What was it?
COVID.
Oh yeah, that was it.
It was on the 5th.
We're talking about this morning.
Yeah, so on the 5th anniversary of the announcement of lockdown, around about the end of March when Boris told us all to stay indoors or else. So we asked ourselves whether businesses had learned any lessons 5 years on. If it happened again now, well, we were asking, would they even have furlough? Could they afford to have furlough? And if they didn't have furlough, how many days till civil unrest?
About 3. Every town's 9 meals for monarchy.
9 meals.
3 days worth of food, isn't it? Supermarkets have about 3 days worth of food.
Yeah.
I should probably stop now.
I've triggered him.
This is my yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Pause
so stock
on that
up.
discussion.
Well, interesting that EU have told everyone to stock up 3 days worth of food, haven't they?
The EU have?
The EU have told all citizens
didn't tell me.
to...
I'm not in the EU.
You're not in the EU. They don't care.
They don't care. Especially now you've got lower tariffs than everyone else.
So
bloody Brits.
Yeah, we could afford 4 days worth of food probably. So.
Probably.
But they were telling everybody to at least have 3 days worth of food.
Yeah.
And water knocking about.
Okay. I'm going to go to the shops after work.
Exactly. Get that
bottled
bottled
water.
Under the See, I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to just chuck loads like bottled water and canned goods and just
see what people look like.
Race round Sainsbury's or any other supermarket and just see if I can induce a kind of like, how come that guy's buying all that stuff? Yeah. And I'm just like,
well, especially if you go out to the car and come back in again and get another load. Yeah. Oh my God, he's back.
Or just get the kids with like trolleys as well. Come on,
buying all this tin food and bottled water. Okay, stop there. This could go on forever. Right, so here we are, episode 115. Now, we try not to make this, the subjects that we choose, too current affairs-y, because we know that some people tune in many months, maybe even years and decades after we've recorded the thing. But this week really is so newsworthy and is likely to stick around in the news for a long, long time to come, that at least we have an episode inspired by the new tariffs that Trump has put on the whole world, including islands that only have penguins on them. Which is just fascinating, and amazingly mathematical formula to work out how he comes up with his made-up numbers. So it's an interesting week for all sorts of different reasons, and how is it going to play out? I did, just as a little thing, ask ChatGPT to adopt the persona of a very experienced economist with no political views to defend his position. And I could almost hear the NVIDIA chips screaming as it prepared its answer. But it tried its best, and it did say that maybe it will change supply chains, and clearly there will be high inflation in America, probably recession, if not zero growth or something in America, world trade wars, all this stuff which we're all expecting. But on the positive side, it said, well, if he really is doing this, almost forget the pain, the gain is worth it type of mantra, and that we've exported all our jobs to low-wage economies and we're going to bring them back. Yep. Well, it would be painful to do that, and this is the pain. So that was its argument. If that's really your single political objective, and to give yourself leverage with other countries, because once you put them in, you've got levering power to take them off, and all that. So he said, it's not, there is certainly madman logic behind it, and if that's your political priorities, what he's done is consistent with that. Yeah, may not be what other people would do, but I think
method in the madness, maybe.
Well, exactly. I don't think he's as daft as people point out. I think there's a bit of a persona playing there, like Boris, our previous Prime Minister, very intelligent man, but played the fool and to good effect, Anyway, whatever. But it prompted the idea for this episode, which is, does economics matter in business? And I don't know about you, how much economics education did you have formally?
I've got the Economics for Dummies book at home.
Have you opened it?
I've made it through to about chapter 5 or 6 or something. Right.
Well, you're probably already then in the top small number % of business people in the UK. I didn't have any formal economics education other than one paper, an elective paper I had in my third year at university. I did economics. And I'm not a big essay writer, and all that history stuff. But I found it interesting. Yeah. A bit like I find history interesting, but because I went the science route, I didn't get to study it. So I'm very jealous of all those people with knowledge of those things.
I did read a very interesting book on the history of the dollar. Was it Niall Ferguson or is he?
Could have been. I've recognised that name. Yeah.
And I think it was him who wrote a book on, I think it's to do with the dollar crisis, I think it might be called, and it was all about the history of how the dollar came to be, and all that. It was a really interesting book, actually.
Well, I read something similar about the history of the pound.
Yeah.
In probably England as it was, but maybe broader Saxony or whatever, Saxon Britain, whatever it is, we had different pounds. So every different region had its own pound, and they're all worth different things. So we had different exchange rates around the country. And the symbol for our pound has got the line through it because that was one region's symbol for it, and that's the one that ended up dominating from somewhere in East Anglia or whatever. But the whole thing about monetaryism, Keynesianism, the money supply theories and all this sort of stuff, it is sort of fascinating. But do you need it in business? That's the question I'm asking today. What do you think?
So two people who have just admitted their complete lack of economic knowledge.
We're going to talk about
it.
The importance of economic education.
Buckle up.
Well, I know a little bit about it, enough to be dangerous, I think. Yeah, and we've applied bits of it in our work before around supply-demand theory and that sort of thing. So, just briefly starting on tariffs, I think this has probably been covered enough in the papers this week because everybody's saying, what is an import tariff anyway? I think the important thing to note is that it gets applied to the companies in the country that's applying the tariff. And whilst I say we're putting tariffs on China of 34% or on the UK of 10%, China and the UK don't pay any more. They just sell what they normally sell. But the importer has to pay that extra, which implies that the prices will go up and therefore demand will drop. That's economics, right? And so we'll wait and see if that actually happens. But that's the point of the tariffs. And his point about it is trade imbalances. So you've got to understand a bit of economic theory as to what's the problem with trade imbalances. And that can have impacts on your exchange rate, which central banks try and address with interest rates, and that affects inflation again. So it's all that. Does that all matter? Well, at the macro level, for sure. But how would you apply that at the business level? So I think at the moment, all we need to worry about is the impact on your business of tariffs, either because you're going to be paying them if you have a tariff inbound, or because the demand for your products abroad.
Well, I have had to shelve my Stetson and cowboy boot business that I was going to start.
Importing Stetsons to state. That's real coals to Newcastle.
They've just got,
You're going to put that on pause for a bit.
Put that on pause, see what happens.
But I suppose then the bits out of economic theory that might give you some solace is that you don't have to be price competitive. Unless you're a commodity which is completely price competitive, there is some element of the benefits of the product that come across, right? Right to the point where you get luxury goods, which are almost oppositely related to price. The more expensive they are, the more attractive they are. Okay, that's a real luxury thing. So if you can position your product to be more luxury-esque, if there's bits of other benefits in it that can't be created by an American company. Yeah. So minis are one of the big exports from the UK to the States.
British
iconic.
brand.
It's even got the British flag in the rear lights, right?
Yeah.
There isn't an equivalent of that in the States, so they're not just going to say, "Oh, I'll buy a Chevy instead."
Yeah, that'd be really distracting, wouldn't it? that would just be like, "Oh, it's blinding me. What's going on with that?" All the stripes and dots.
I thought you meant put the British flag on the back of a Chevy. That would be really
American flag on the back of a. Oh, they don't do small cars. They do the Americans.
No, you'd have a big screen. You'd have a lot of real estate to put your flag on.
Massive, yeah.
Bumper stickers and all sorts.
Very distractingly. Yeah.
So I suppose that's the point. I mean, that doesn't really help much if you've got aluminium products going in or car parts going into the States. There's not a lot you can do about that. Yeah. And we're just going to have to buckle up and hope the storm passes. But if you have got the option of emphasising the Britishness or the quality end or the things that the consumer can't buy elsewhere, differentiate your product. So I suppose that's that part of it. And the rest of it, we've just got to wait and see what happens to the global economy. Forget whether you're personally exposed to tariffs or not. If the economy tanks everywhere, then we're all in it. Yeah. But as we were saying, was it last week or the week before? I think it was a chat we were having, that even if the economy shrank by 10%, for most SMEs, our market share is measured in fractions of 1%. So there's a lot of opportunity out there we're not tapping into. So it's not about just crying in your beer and saying, "Oh, we can't get any."
Yeah, and lots of businesses succeed during a recession, don't they? It's not.
Well, some are counter-cyclical, you're right. And some have just got an attitude that when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and they do well because everyone else is crying into their beer. So if we are headed for a bit of a recession globally, locally, America, or whatever it is, or in your markets, then be ready to react positively. Come out of the blocks fighting.
And I think the advice always isn't that Roger Martin Fagg gives, an economist who is actually qualified to comment on these things.
He is. He's actually an economist.
But his mantra has always been just be really good at doing what you do.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
And just keep adding value to your customers and be the best you can be at what you're doing and stick at it. And actually there comes a point, particularly I think with economics, there's only so much you can control, isn't it? You can only control what you can control. Yep. So if you can control the kind of quality that you're doing, your marketing, your sales processes, all those sorts of things, you've got control over that. And it's just such a truism, I suppose, isn't it? Be the best you can at all those things, but it's actually harder than you think. It's easy to say, hard to do.
Give a quick plug to the Roger Martin Fagg newsletter while you mentioned his name. Go on.
The Roger Martin Fagg newsletter is coming out.
There you go, folks.
There you go.
That's marketing.
The latest insights from Roger will be available on the website and in your inbox if you subscribe. By the time you listen to this, you probably already had it. What did you think of the Roger Martin Fagg?
Oh, that's very good. He did say in his intro that he's not going to cover the subject of the Trump tariffs. He said he's lost for words. He couldn't possibly. What I think probably happened is that he wrote it before it was announced. But anyway, it's always a very good insight. He always comes up with some predictions for the year, and I don't think we have to promote him much more because most of our regular listeners will probably be already aware that he comes out, and we publish his newsletter as part of our quarterly email that we send out. So if you haven't got that before, head over to our website or search for it. I think we come up number one for his name, don't we?
Probably.
Search. So do that. So that's him. But you mentioned there about what to do in a slowdown, and like you say, his advice: focus on your product, your design, your customer service, and stuff. That leads into a sort of a Keynesian economic theory that when the economy is slowed down, you invest. So if you're not busy doing the day-to-day job, you instead divert your efforts to something else which will pay off in the future. Yeah. Now, some companies use that when there's not enough work on the shop floor, they get everybody to paint the walls. as kind of an investment. It's more about just keeping people busy, but it's still, someone's got to do it, right? And it saves you painting the walls when you're busy in a year's time. So that's not bad. But what about real investment? What about, adopting some training, for example, bringing that in place, or bringing in a new system, or revamping your product design, or, really starting to think, how can I weather the storm? Okay, I'm not going to have the same income, but I'm going to use the resources I've got now to do long-term, medium-term and long-term benefit things. The problem with that, of course, is you need the reserves to see you through.
Maybe that's slightly tied into the whole discussion we were having around COVID and what lessons have people learned since then and making your business more resilient. Almost having that kind of ideation pipeline of what could we do?
Yeah.
If you did an exercise to say, right, if we sort of dice this business up in a different way, what skills have we got?
Yeah.
What could we do if we had, if this all disappeared, we could use these people to do this equipment, this in IP or whatever, and almost have a list of those things just ready to go, so that, and maybe have a few little pilot projects, or you could think about it in that sort of way. So right, if we had to now suddenly change tack, what would we focus on, and have that, because I think in those sorts of situations, speed is key. You don't want to be sitting there for 6 months trying to work out, well, okay, we've got to pivot, but what are we going to pivot to? And everyone's arguing about this, that, and the other, and no one's done any research, and you're starting from...
Maybe every business owner has secretly got a bit of a pet project in the back of their mind. If only we had some more time, we could develop this area more or look into that more. So perhaps just, flush that out, make that more formal.
Have a little...
Put it on your risk register. I don't know, make a list of something, scribble it on your whiteboard and leave it there. Something.
Spend a couple of hours thinking about, well, if we had, what could we do? I mean,
well, it's a bit like that thing that they say Google did, and I believe them, that 20% of their time they're able to work on private projects. Well, instead of it being private projects, just a medium-term investment-y type project rather than something that is in your inbox today.
Yeah.
So that's Keynesian theory, really. Keynesian economics drives that. I think the other thing that people don't understand enough. Oh, well, I say that. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't understand enough. Price elasticity.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we did a bit of work on this, didn't we, a little while ago?
Well, yeah, you did most of it. I smiled and nodded.
You had to put up with me talking to you about it. But most people, I think, will be familiar with the fact that for most normal goods, non-luxury goods, non-giving goods, as prices go up, demand goes down, and supply goes up. That's the whole supply-demand curve. You could draw it on a graph. Yeah. Draw yourself a little graph, have one curve going up, one curve going down. Bob's your uncle. That's the theory. Yeah. So the whole point about price elasticity is, what is the slope of that curve? If I put my prices up by 10%, what would demand go down by? Now, there's a great trick that I've seen played so many times in seminars, but I still can't believe people haven't seen it. But of course, there's always new people coming into this sort of thing, where you say, give us your gross margin, and let's say gross margin's 20%. I say, right, now look what happens to your profit if you put your prices up by 10%. So your prices go up by 10%, and what happens to your gross margin? Well, instead of making £20 out of every 100, you make £30 out of every 110. Right? So you've suddenly added 50% to your gross margin for a 10% increase in your price. Everyone thinks, oh, that's amazing. Of course, what happens when the price goes up is the demand goes down a little bit. So it's really important to know, how much does my demand go down by for a 10% increase, because it might be worth it. If I'm going to make 50% more gross margin for just a 10% more price increase, and I'm only going to lose, 20% of my work, hang on, I'll go for that then. And you can do the sums, can't you? So it's about understanding that curve.
Trying simple language.
Can you translate all that?
Put your prices up for less hassle and make more money.
Yeah, great. I love it. You could be the Trump impersonator.
I could, yeah.
Simple. Yeah.
Well, I'm getting on a flight after this to DC, so I need to learn some stuff.
Yeah.
I'm an economic advisor.
I could tell. He's been tapping into you, hasn't he?
So I've got to learn some things here.
So have you perfected that bit? This is really easy. The way he presents everything. It's really easy. EU, that's
going to be a great deal.
Yeah,
it's going to be
it's
a great deal.
Really easy. You do it to us, we do it to you. Simple.
Yeah.
So thanks for your translation there.
Yeah.
Now, there was a project, I'm sure we're both involved in this, we were talking about it earlier, where we used this price elasticity theory for a client, or two different clients we were talking to about it. I don't think it really got to the end point, which was a bit disappointing.
Was some of it mixed in with yield management as well?
It was, and maybe that was where it started. We're trying to model the yield or it was to do with goods that expired
in time. Yeah,
not perishables, but just expired, like an airplane seat,
airplane seat, hotel room,
exactly. And we did a blog on that a little while ago that became, I think it's still up to date. It's one of our most all-time listened to, what read blogs, because it's been there for so long. But it talks about how do you price goods that expire. And it's very time sensitive, isn't it? And you see it, we are all quite used to it now, I suppose, with airline tickets and that. And there was a scandal last year with, who was it that did the concert that's coming up with the pricing, the dynamic pricing, something coming up?
Oasis?
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the dynamic pricing, that's all it is. Just means that the nearer you get to the time when the ticket expires, the price has to either go up or down depending on how close you are to selling them all.
Yeah.
Which is just what airlines do. So we modelled that. And a challenge I put to people, and I gave seminars on this sort of stuff, is I drew the two axes of an empty graph, put the curve on it of what happens to demand when price goes up, and its curve goes down, high at the left, low at the right, little curve. And then I challenged anybody in the room to put the profit curve over the top of that. And everyone sort of stares at you. I haven't thought about that before. So I drew it on. It's probably on our website somewhere, but it starts very low, goes to a peak, and then comes down again. So it's kind of a hill.
Yeah.
So there's a top, which is the maximum profit point. And by mathematically modelling it, we showed that if you just try 2 or 3 different price points, work out what the demand is for them, you can then fit that to the model and have a pretty good stab at where would the top of the hill be. And that was the model we used for the hotel company in Ireland that we did that for. So price elasticity. Don't just assume it's a number, an economic word. It really does apply, and it's really, really important as part of your pricing strategy.
Yeah.
One of the 5 P's in marketing. Get that right and understand all of its interplay and that stuff. That's that. Opportunity cost. That's an economic concept, isn't it?
Yeah, we were talking about this with sunk cost as well, weren't we?
Yes, true. Sunk cost is another. Well, that's also crosses over into finance as well, but it's another economic principle, isn't it? So opportunity cost is the cost of not doing something. And you sometimes see that in capital appraisals, but not often enough. If back to our invest during a recession argument, or I was having a chat with somebody earlier this morning, of saying, well, all businesses are quite careful of their costs, aren't they? They're trying not to spend where they don't have to. Well, I said they are, and sometimes that's the right thing to do, but just be aware of the opportunity cost. If we don't recruit that replacement.
What would you say the difference of cost and investment? Where does that line?
Well, it's like, is it a Mark Twain quote that says, accountants know the cost of everything and the value of nothing? Costs can still have value, but I suppose the investment is more explicitly something that gives a return. Yeah. So is there a cost to, is the buying of the coffee for our kitchen a cost or an investment? Well, at the face of it, it's a cost, right? You don't have to do it.
Depends what time of the day it is, doesn't it?
But exactly. If it's like it wakes everybody up, it's a great investment. Paying the electricity bill is definitely a cost. But without it, you can't run. So it's that they're the things that are definitely costs. Paying for a HubSpot subscription or employing another salesperson or another shop floor person, it's got to be an investment, right? They produce their value adders.
Value adders, yeah.
That's what if they're not, you wouldn't do it. Why would you take on somebody else on the shop floor if you couldn't make more money than it costs you to have them? So I think that's probably the difference with it. So opportunity cost, definitely bear that in mind. Not doing something doesn't just save you cost. It stops you getting the return on what that would have been. Yeah. Whereas sunk cost is more about how we treat stuff that's already happened. And this is, I think it's one of those psychological things, isn't it? That humans can't quite get their head around some things, like predicting exponential curves or risk aversion. We always make the wrong decision when we're trying to balance risks. And this is one of those that I've already spent £1 million trying to get this right. I can't stop now. Well,
gambler's fallacy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I've lost £1 million, so if I just bet one more stake of $1 million, I'll be all right. So it's the fact that you've got to ignore everything that's happened before. You starting from today.
Again.
Yeah, would you spend another £1 on that thing? And I guess this is like the HS2 argument when they cancelled HS2 for the second leg of it anyway, Birmingham North. But we've already spent all this money. Yeah, but you don't have to spend any more.
Yeah, gone.
Exactly. Drove past that the other day. That's coming on. Bridges all over the place. Yeah. So that's opportunity cost. Productivity. I think that's at a national level as well as at a business level. Quite an important notion. was talking to you earlier on, actually. I'd read somewhere, I was listening to something on the radio about how we are mismeasuring productivity.
Yeah.
Because there's loads of activity that people are doing, which has value, that doesn't get recorded. So not everybody knows, but things like a teacher teaching a class or a doctor seeing a patient or a bin being emptied are all counted in the GDP figures.
Right.
Even though it's not sales as a result of it in the classic, UK PLC sort of way of thinking about it all, but they're all activities that have value.
There's Birmingham are finding out at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, they've decided to stop adding value
to bin collection
the streets.
Is pretty. Oh, I'll tell you what, I found a dead rat in our garden this morning.
But you don't even live in Birmingham.
I know.
No
come a long way.
She was on holiday.
Had a Birmingham accent. Used to look like.
You could tell from the squeak.
I don't know what I was doing.
Was he wearing a Peaky Blinders cap? Yeah. Oh, we're going to get into stereotype trouble there. Ooh.
Cut.
We get complaints, So we're on, GDP productivity. So the bit that isn't getting measured is all that stuff that people are doing on their side hustles, the unofficial economy, but also creating stuff for social media. I hadn't thought about this before. Every time you post something on Instagram, or certainly on TikTok, and the ones that have got adverts, you are adding value, maybe not for you, but for somebody. Because if TikTok didn't have everybody creating all that content, right, they wouldn't have the value that they get. Now, they decide to reward some of those back, so that probably does get picked up in a GDP figure. But there's a load of people that don't get rewarded for putting stuff on TikTok or Instagram, isn't there? And that is part of our productivity.
So we're not measuring, so the measures are changing as we change our behaviours.
Yeah, I do think the economists are keeping up with what's happening.
The value is.
So the bits that they measure are not showing great productivity increases, but maybe that's because they're just not looking in the right places. Maybe they're not measuring. If they're prepared to reflect a doctor doing an appointment or a teacher holding a class, then why not somebody putting up a cat video? If someone makes money out of it somewhere.
There you go. Well, I listened to someone talking, I had a conversation with someone talking about engagement and productivity as well. They're very closely aligned. But apparently, we've got a very unengaged workforce.
Right. That type of engagement.
So that type of engagement. So that has a drag effect on productivity. If people aren't engaged coming
to work.
Is that
kind of a presentism thing, do you think? Just turn up and chat all day.
And one interesting thing you said on that, which is a bit of a diversion from economics, but it's still interesting nonetheless, is that if you give feedback to somebody, so if you give them an engaged employee needs 6 positive comments to every one kind of corrective comment, shall we say. Someone who you're giving, one positive comment and one kind of critical comment or feedback or whatever.
Opportunity for improvement
comment is technically classed as someone who's unengaged. So also you think, if you think back over the week when you talk to people, you balance people would be like, well, I gave you that good bit of feedback and then there was that other bit of feedback. Technically, that would be someone who's unengaged.
6 to 1. This is some research or whatever.
Yeah.
So 6 positive things for every constructive criticism thing.
Yeah.
And that's for engaged people to be engaged.
To be engaged at work. It's a lot of that, a lot of positive reinforcement required.
That makes you think. How many positive things have you said to me this week? It's not 6.
So that's how we get through this, tariff trial. Is by just encouraging each other.
Just say nice things.
Say nice things. We'll all be more productive.
ChatGPT does that all the time, right? It's so bloody nice. It annoys me. Wouldn't it be nice if it just adopted a persona of being slightly more critical? Are you sure?
You need to go on to what's Musk's one? Grok, isn't it? That'll be a bit more.
You can choose a different persona.
That'll be a bit more savage, I think.
A bit more,
Be a bit more.
Hasn't been trained to be uber polite.
Yeah.
Toxic positivity. That was the thing. So that was the, there's a few different things in there, but it's just all on the topics of does economics matter? So we've talked about things like price elasticity, opportunity cost, sunk costs, Keynesianism, easy for you to say, investing in a downturn, supply demand, and what happens to tariffs. And as you said earlier, the advice, just do good jobs for your customers, keep your quality up, have great products, look after them, because we can't affect the big stuff.
Yeah.
It's like that prayer, isn't it, about the wisdom to know the difference and all that stuff. So,
and who knows where everything will be by the time this podcast gets released.
Well, exactly. That's a whole few days away by the time it's been edited.
We could be ransacking Supermarkets.
Well, it's 9 meals away. There's probably more than 9 meals between us recording this and it going out.
Yeah.
So the next video, the cameras could come on and there's just like, I don't know, chairs
like
flying through the window.
It's like Mad Max in here or something. We're just
the studio's been stripped bare.
Like paint on our faces and feathers and stuff. And
eating the plants.
Just kind of like,
Someone could have fun with AI on that one and make that happen. Good. Well, thank you again for listening to another off-the-wall episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Just really trying to bring another aspect to the debate rather than just bemoaning what tariffs are doing, but using it as a prompt to ask ourselves, should we at least be a bit more aware of the contribution that economics can have to how we all run our businesses or work within them. If you like that or anything else that we've done in our previous episodes, please send a link on to some of your friends and colleagues, put a comment on there, go and subscribe, do all the usual things. And in the meantime, good luck with your business.